I call myself a therapist matchmaker too, sometimes for people. I love to, if they're looking, let's say I'm seeing a couple, right? And I think that actually, instead of breaking up with them, I might say, I really think it would be really important for you to see your own therapist.
This is gonna hurt. It's time for the Suffering Podcast.
I know of a thing called psychological abandonment, right? That situation where a psychologist just does not do their job, or a psychiatrist, whoever there may be. And I've experienced this. This is why it's kind of was a singular thing. So I'll give you this situation. After my shooting, I was seeing this workers' comp therapist who was not good. And I will never speak his name again, because this guy should not be a doctor in any way, shape, or form. I went to rehab. I checked myself into rehab, and I called him on the way down saying, hey, I'm not going to make my appointment this week. I'm going to rehab. I get out of rehab and I call him. He never called my cell phone back, because you can check occasionally. When I got out of rehab, he's the first person I called because I'm under an obligation. He says, yeah, I can't see you no more because you're not listening to what I'm saying. I'm not kidding you. I'm not kidding you. And I was so mad at him, because it was you feel abandoned. And there were some other ramifications of that going down the line. But I'm like, how the hell can you do this to somebody? If somebody's in crisis and you're just like, well, I can't help you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a little different than breaking up. I understand why.
No. These were very, they're hard even when it's the right thing to do, because you want to just like help everybody, when in fact they need to be willing to do it. Another situation would be if there is an active affair and they're there for affair recovery, and one person is just really not willing to do the work, or they're not willing to stop seeing the third party, things like that. It's also just, and what I usually typically do is if that's not working out, I speak to it. I'm gentle, I'm direct, I'm transparent. And then I also will invite them to do a few things. One is they are always welcome to come back if things change. I'm always willing to see one of them individually if one of them wants to continue individually, knowing that they can't really come back as a couple in that circumstance, because then it's a conflict of interest, because now I have this rapport with this one individual. So there are all these options that I try to, it's dependent on the situation, but that's usually how I navigate that. And it's rare. Couples usually will stay, or they will end on their own.
Some people go to marriage counseling because it's a financial burden in order to get divorced. But I think the majority of people go to marriage counseling because they're trying to save something, because there's still a speck of something still there. You can't you'll never restart that fire without some sort of spark. Not everything's gloom and doom in marriage counseling, because you have that that old soul where people will come and they'll talk to you. And I know you get a lot of joy out of helping people. So tell me about some of the victories. That's really what I want to hear. Because everybody thinks marriage counseling, oh my God, their marriage is in trouble. But I'm sure you saved some.
And I feel like it's also a collaborative effort sometimes. So I have some situations that I love, where I call myself what is it? I call myself a therapist matchmaker too, sometimes for people. I love to, if they're looking, let's say I'm seeing a couple, right? And I think that actually, instead of breaking up with them, I might say, I really think it would be really important for you to see your own therapist. I feel like we're getting stunted here, and your own work might help with just being able to have your language and what's going on, and figuring out what's going on with you, so then you can then come back here and be able to like bring that into the couple's work. And I have a couple where the husband, I matched him up with somebody that I collaborate with, and he has made like strides in the couple session because of the work he's been doing independent. You know what I mean? So it's not one of those things sometimes where you need to work on yourself first, then we come back. Sometimes it can be at the same time, if that makes sense. So that's a situation where it's like amazing to see a transformation relationally with a couple when, and actually the wife is doing her own work too. And so seeing them, how they show up together. And that's really like couples work is witnessing one another work on themselves. Like, I think a lot of couples will come in with the intention of, I'm going to win couples therapy today. And like, I'm making this person change. And that is impossible. And that's not, I mean, it's so common, but that's not how it works. How it works and what makes it a success is to be able to actually look in the mirror and say, how am I contributing to the problem and what can I change? How can I mean, curiosity, being curious about your partner. And when couples are really able, like if I can, in a way, sometimes just even model that in a session with them.
But that's
they
pretty
take that
interesting.
on.
It's pretty interesting you say, because when I would go to individual therapy, I was trying to make myself a better person, which I thought would translate to making a better marriage. To some extent, yes. To some extent, yeah. But there were still things like I couldn't work on this when this was so messed up. Do you find that? Like you kind of said it in there. That's how my mind works. I'm going to work on myself and I'm going to be better so I can be better here, but it doesn't always translate.
Doesn't always translate. I would need to know more about what you're saying. I'm curious about it because sometimes your goals might conflict with the relationship goals. I always say when a couple is in front of me, the relationship is my client. So what are the relationship goals? And if your individual goals are in sync to some degree with those relationship goals, then it might work out, right?
In my particular case, it was the things going on in the marriage were contributed from the things that I was doing, the bad behaviors that I was doing, which that's how I saw it. It's not 100% the truth.
Yeah.
But that's how I saw it. So if I get here, I can get up to where this thing should be. And then I can work on that if I need to.
Yeah, but a lot, you mentioned it before about history of a relationship. A lot of history is also about your past as a child. And seeing it, that's, it's a difficult transition.
It is. Yeah. It's a big piece of it.
Very big piece.
So
Who you really are, who you were, who your family was, and who you became.
Yep, there's intergenerational, multi-generational trauma, and there's also attachment styles, which are something that I work from. And I'm trained as a Gottman therapist, but I take on a lot of different therapeutic models. One of them is attachment and emotional couples therapy and imago dialogue. So I don't know, with your experience, if any of that means anything to you.
No.
But all of those therapeutic
I did stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night, so I understand what you're saying. You never saw that commercial?
Oh. Imago, you could tell by my face, I was a little confused.
Yeah, no, it's a commercial.
I saw that.
A guy's in the surgery room, and they're like, "Are you a surgeon?" No, but I did stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night because he got a good night rest. So he figures he could do surgery.
Okay. Yeah, okay.
It's not a good joke when
okay.
you got to explain it. It just doesn't
It's a dad
land.
joke?
It's
No,
yeah.
not even. So I'm sorry.
Dad jokes are the best. You can't knock dad jokes. But so you had these victories where you've had people come back together, and it's got to bring you an enormous amount of joy because that's what you want to do.
Yeah, and couples that have navigated infidelity has really been amazing to see them work through that. When both people actually come in and want to do the work, that is amazing.
And how do you? So if the one person was unfaithful to the other person,
Yes.
it's got to be enormously hard work for you. You have an enormous challenge in front of you to get
tough.
the person who was cheated on, to get them to trust again. That's a huge bridge you got to build.
Yeah. I work with phases, and I present it to the couple so they have absolutely no question in what the expectations are, because it's really, really hard for both parties to navigate the recovery process, because the person who did the cheating needs to essentially be telling their partner everything, like every nuanced detail of what's going on, being able to give passwords and this is not forever, right? But this is for a certain period of time where you have like no privacy. And I usually use the phrase, you need to tell them before they can ask. Tell them before they even ask you. That is not fun.
That's a difficult obstacle to get
And usually when there is a betrayal, right? Sometimes it's even, well, I wasn't even really cheating. It wasn't really an affair. I say, okay, so I just, under the umbrella of a betrayal, right? There are certain boxes to be checked.
It's an emotional betrayal.
Exactly. Like somebody was like, a one night stand can be cheating. Communicating over one day emotionally with somebody in such a way that you would be communicating with your partner could be, that could be like a one night stand, but emotional. You know what I mean?
Betrayal.
But under the umbrella of betrayal is your reality is fractured. What you thought existed does not exist, and you're questioning everything. So it doesn't need to be an actual affair. It could be an addiction. It could be an obscene purchase that you didn't know about, that you found out about, right? It could be all sorts of things. There's a betrayal because now you're going to be questioning everything that happened in your relationship. And when that happens, there are very similar, typically, symptoms for post-traumatic stress that happen. So the person that was betrayed can have flashbacks, they can have nightmares, they can have, angry outbursts, and they can have the same questions over and over and over again. And so the person that did the betraying is like, how many times do I need to answer this question? It's like, until they're done asking the question, which usually doesn't last forever, but there's a level of patience that you need to have to take on the questioning.
Isn't there another technique besides until you finish asking the question?
Well,
that's frustrating.
It
can
is
be frustrating to anybody.
It is frustrating. Usually there is like a secondary disclosure, right? Where the person that has the questions, that was betrayed, they have a list of questions, and you're in a setting where you can slow it down. If it starts to get too much, too reactive, the person that was betrayed, they can be angry, but they still need to be respectful. And there still needs to be like slowing it down and checking in on like physically, how are you feeling? Like if they're getting flooded or they're getting too physiologically reactive or in fight or flight, it's time to pause. And then after those questions are done, usually they're done, like in the official Q&A. And typically the physical, sexual, detailed questions are not helpful. Knowing that information is typically not helpful for people. But it's really up to that person that's doing the questions. Because some questions they might think they want to know, and then they hear the answer, and they're like, oh, that didn't actually help. I don't want to know any more about that. So yeah, it's not forever. It's not like, you think like, you're going to have to be doing this forever.
Listen,
but there's also
I've been in every aspect of that, so I'm taking it like a sponge, and it's
hard.
It's very hard.
It's hard because
very hard.
But there's also, on the flip side, there's something called truth trickling. So if you've done the betrayal, right, and you already have broken your partner's heart and you feel really guilty and you feel ashamed, and they're asking you these questions, and you want to like not make them feel as bad. You don't want to hurt them anymore. So you try to sweeten the answer or make it less than it really was. That's actually, it's worse in the long run, but it's so common. That's why we have the term truth trickling. And so the more they ask the question, there's more truth that comes out. And so they're going to continue to ask because they're like, oh, but he keeps on telling me more. She keeps telling me more. So I'm going to keep asking. And they're like, well, he's not being honest, or she's not, she's still lying to me. And I bring that up from the beginning, that this is a common thing. This truth trickling may happen, and it's common. This is why. It's not an excuse, but this is something to be expected. And so sometimes you do need to ask these questions. Like, it's okay to ask them more than once. I don't know if that clarifies it a little. It's painful. It is not easy.
It sounds horrifying.
Mm-hmm.
It does. It sounds. I'm trying to put myself in the position of that couch, and it just sounds awful. But so you see all this stuff. You're married, and how does it make you more stressed out at home, less stressed out at home, because you have the burden of knowledge? Anytime you have the burden of knowledge with anything, it affects your personal life.
Yeah.
And how you do things. We may lock doors and make sure everything's secured and look at things from a different angle because we have the burden of knowledge.
You know so much. Yeah.
Now you have the burden of knowledge. So you know what's good and what's bad. You know signs. Your poor husband, God, I feel bad for him. He can't get away with anything.
Stop.
So how has it made you?
But that's interesting that you say that.
So wait, do you bring that
Because-
practice home in your life?
So when your husband,
That'd
you
be
think
frustrating.
when you think your
honestly.
husband's doing something.
I'd be very
tell me
frustrated.
tell me about your day.
Me or him?
No, I'm
What are you
saying
saying?
if
You were him or me?
if I was, I don't know, if I was him and you brought that, all those different scenarios.
It's
and,
like
hey,
don't
let's try
therapize
this,
me.
like, yeah,
Which is not a word, but we'll make it a word tonight.
it actually sounds pretty good.
Therapize. So does it? You bringing that stuff into your personal life? Does it make you a better wife, a better partner, all around?
I don't want to critique myself. I try. Well, I've done my own therapy. I've done my own 12-step work in Al-Anon, and I try to be aware, but I'm also human. So I feel like as I'm listening to you, I'm like getting defensive because that's one of the struggles for me anyway. I don't know about other therapists. I can only speak for myself. Is like when the wires get crossed of like just being like a wife or a mother or a friend or like daughter or whatever I am, and a therapist in like either direction. Because I get that, like, oh, you're therapizing me right now, and I'm like, actually no, I'm just like showing up as a human or my wife. But that's a common thing, right? That people, because I'm sure you, like you're saying, as whatever your career is, sometimes that translates also. It does naturally.
It's kind of the crux of my question is we all feel like imposters from time to time. When your marriage isn't perfect, even though, and now you're going to go dole out information and advice and suggestions to people about their marriage. When your marriage is all jacked up, it breeds that imposter syndrome. Listen, we talk about suffering in here, okay? We have suffered more in the past 5 days than I ever want to suffer in the rest of my life. So I think one of the big mistakes that people make is when you are an advocate for something, whatever that may be, doesn't mean you got it all together. And that's the point I'm trying to make.
Yes.
It doesn't mean you have your own trials in your marriage. If you didn't, I'd say your marriage isn't healthy because we all have them.
Yeah. And when I'm saying defensive, I'm not saying you're upsetting me. What I'm saying is it reminds me sometimes of, sometimes people will ask me, and it does, I say imposter syndrome all the time because I feel that in every area of my life. I feel like I'm not home enough, so I'm an imposter in my house. Like I could be a better mother. I could be a better therapist. I could be better anything. When sometimes some people will be like, well, you're a therapist. What would you do about it? When I get a question like that, that's like, it trips me up because I'm like, are you like making fun of me or something right now? Or are you seriously asking me? Like, I don't even know what to do with that because I'm in a scenario with somebody that's I'm not even thinking as a therapist in that moment. And then on the flip side, from what you're saying is if there's something going on at home and I feel like a failure because I should know what to do, or I should like be showing up in a different way, or how I model for my clients is not working with my husband. Like, what's wrong with me? That certainly happens.
Because we
give the best advice, but don't take it.
Well,
That's
yeah,
what
that's
we always
that,
say to each other.
that's so him and I are very similar
Always,
like that.
always.
I can give him the best advice in the world.
Yeah.
I don't follow that same advice, and vice versa. We will call each, and I'm sure you have somebody, a colleague, where this is like you, where you got to bounce something off of them, and it'll be something like this. Hey, Mike, I'm thinking about doing this. He'll go, I wouldn't do that. Would you do it? He goes, 100% I'd do it. I'd do it in a second. You know, because that's
It
how
is
we are.
true.
You're very good at helping other people, but you're very bad at helping yourself. As tragedy struck this week, so I'm not saying it like you have tools. You have tools to use at home that other people don't have. Either they just don't have them, or they're not available to them, or they haven't gotten them yet. And how do you apply what you've learned, seeing all this pain and suffering in your private practice, and go? And I'm sure you would be human. You wouldn't be human if you didn't go apply some of that stuff at home in order to make your part. You want a happy life. You want a happy home. You're human. Yes, you're not a robot. Couples don't come and sit in front of a robot and just say and dole out advice. You know, like a vending machine. So that's why I asked that question. It wasn't. Again, I want to go back to this. Just because you advocate for something doesn't mean you got it all together.
Nobody does.
Nobody does.
Nobody does.
So where can our audience find you?
So I will give my website. I have Instagram, but my website has all the links to anything that I've done, including my Facebook, my Instagram, and other podcasts, including this one will be on there. And that is heartinhandtherapy.com. And heart is spelled HEART, inhandtherapy.com.
We're going to put a link to all that stuff in our show notes. So, Suzanne, we're coming to the end of this thing here, and I feel like I just got an education. I may have to pay you a little bit afterwards.
I feel like that flew by. I feel like I wanted to say more.
An hour goes very fast,
Yes.
but that's why they always make a part 2.
Yeah.
So don't write that off. You've seen, you know, you've kind of lived this storied life where you got into some form of the medical field and you sort of transitioned into another one. But it sounds like you were always the go-to person to hear people's issues, problems, and something that brings you joy. But you've witnessed a lot. When that happens, you take in a lot of pain, a lot of suffering, and it had to teach you something. So I'd like to know, what is the suffering of being a marriage therapist or a nurse taught you?
One is balance. Balance also includes being holistic, like considering my mind, considering my spirit, which is the hardest part for me. The second is intentionality. So being in the present moment, not just like grounding, but with people, because that's how I connect the most, when I'm actually like physically present with somebody and observing them and taking them in and finding areas with which to connect, because that brings me the most joy. And I feel like brings my clients the best space to actually grow, is when they feel really connected and understood by me. And that's the only way I can do that with myself too. And the third one is curiosity. Is just being curious and being inquisitive, not nosy, not meddling. But
That's a fine line right there.
and especially with couples, like even in my own marriage, not assuming, that I know everything about my husband or my friends, because we're always evolving and changing. So to ask questions and to not listen to respond, to actually listen to understand, which is like, that's a really hard one.
Well, pivoting the way you did, I think you're never going to run out of business. And it sounds like you have a good grasp on it. You're doing all the things that I like to hear with a therapist. And the main one is connecting with your clients, because every good therapist that I've ever had, every good therapist that I hold dear to my heart, we've connected in some way. And I think I can't wait to see how this turns out. And hopefully one day you'll be spoken about by your children the same way you speak about your parents.
Oh, thank you.
I think
appreciate that.
I think that's the
That was
greatest
a
compliment
nice
ever.
one. Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming in tonight.
Thank you. It's been an honor, guys.
And that's going to do it for this episode of the Suffering Podcast, the Suffering of a Marriage Therapist with Suzanne Chabot. And let's think about all the stuff that we learned. Role models are a guide, not a path. Life pivots in the direction that best suits you. Sometimes a therapist needs to break up with you. Emotional betrayal is still betrayal. But most importantly, find those wise people in your life and go out and seek them. And that's going to do it for this episode. Go to popple.com, put in the code TSP20 for a 20% discount on your digital business card. Follow us on all social media. That's Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, LinkedIn, Instagram. Like you can't even do it. I'm saying, yeah, just can't even do it. Follow Mike on Instagram at mdepalma20. Follow me at Real Kevin Donaldson, and of course, follow the Suffering Podcast. And what do we say to the God of Death when he shows up? Not today.